This podcast contains content that may be disturbing to some audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, hello. You're listening to a special bonus episode of Death Becomes Us, a show where we explore what it means to be alive, to be dead, and everything in between. We're excited to present to you our origin stories like you've never heard them before. I had a lot working against me. It took a long time to find my voice and even just to find the confidence to stand up and say, this is who I am. I'm a little weird. I'm a little strange, but this is what I do. Growing up, I was raised in a very high demand religion. I had certain expectations and rules and standards of living that I was supposed to follow and live up to, but I never felt like I fit in. Joseph Smith is the founder of Mormonism, and I am a direct descendant of his brother, Hiram Smith, through his first wife. So you can go back through my family tree, and there he is. So Mormonism is literally in my veins. From before I could walk, I was taught that this, black and white, this is what the world is. This is what will happen to you after you die. These are the standards that you have to live by. I did not fit the perfect Mormon woman mold. I have always been more interested in the weird side of things and artistic expression, and I stuck out like a sore thumb. Before I was able to forgive myself, I had to just come to the understanding that my family probably will never know or understand what I do or the impact of my work that it's had on me. It cemented in my mind this idea that I was not good enough. I wasn't good enough for art school. I was. I wasn't good enough for college. I was. I made the decision to ignore everything that made me me. So I got married when I was 19, and I had my oldest daughter, Cadence, when I was barely 21. My son was born around 2 years after that, and he was born premature. He had some health issues. My entire life revolved around taking care of my children and my husband, who had joined the military by that point and was in and out of, he was home sometimes and he was gone other times. Cadence is one of the reasons that I got brave enough to start to question, because I have always been more prone to anxiety. I've always been a worrier. I've cared a lot about what people think about me. And I was noticing that behavior start in Cadence, who had gone from being very confident to then having a few lessons at church and coming home and feeling like we were bad because we stopped at Dairy Queen after church one day. And you're not supposed to go out to eat on Sundays. You're not supposed to spend any money. You go to church and you stay home. And that's all that is acceptable to do. But we had stopped at Dairy Queen, and she had her little kids meal in her lap, and she started crying and asking if she was bad because she had Dairy Queen on a Sunday. And that really stuck with me because it reminded me of all of the times that I felt like I was bad at my core for making these really pretty innocent decisions. I saw her, and I knew that if something didn't change, that she was going to grow up and feel trapped like I felt. But after that, I ripped the Band-Aid off, and I basically told my church leaders that I would not be back. I do not want to be contacted. Do not call me. Do not email me. Do not send anybody to my doorstep. I don't want to hear from you. And then I turned around and I emailed my entire family, and I said, guess what? I'm not Mormon anymore. And it devastated my family, my mom in particular. And this all happened right around Cadence's 8th birthday. I had left my religion. I had opened myself up to the possibility for more, but I didn't know where to look for it. I'd lived in Texas my entire life. My ex-husband had a job opportunity that took us to Florida, and we decided to take it. Things had been rough for us in our personal life. His military career was wearing on us, and he had just gotten back from a very rough deployment. It was rough for me at home. It was rough for him when he was gone. And we were looking for a fresh start. So when I had my initial haunting at my house in Florida, which is the story that I always start this with, is I was walking up the stairs and stubbed my toe, and it led to this terrifying encounter. And I was like, what is happening? Like, this is, I don't understand this. So it was bad enough that I even texted my ex-husband, who was working night shift at the time, and I said, I might need you to come home. Like, I don't know what's wrong. But so I got up and I was going to go downstairs to get ibuprofen. And I stopped in my hallway because there was a presence. And I didn't know how to process what I was feeling other than it was the most terrified I have ever been in my life. And I was looking around and I was like, I'm alone. I know that I'm alone. I've never been frozen in fear like that, still to this day. The next day, I was still thinking about it. And I ended up telling my friends what had happened because I didn't know that if they would be able to answer this, but I knew that they were open to the weird. And they pushed me to call that psychic. And the only reason I ended up doing it was because I was afraid of what would happen if my kids had that experience. So I had this woman come over, and it was overwhelming because I have no exposure to spirituality, ghosts, none of that. None of this existed to me before this day. I never thought about it as a possibility. I knew that something unexplainable had happened and that I needed someone's help. I needed some guidance. And so she blessed and cleared my house. She used holy water, which was wild for me. All of this is just completely unfamiliar territory. She sat down and she asked if I would like a reading, and it changed the course of my life. This whole series of events, but that reading in particular, because she was using a deck of past life cards. I want to say they were from Doreen Virtue. I shuffled and I pulled one card, and when I flipped it over, I felt the feeling that I had heard people describe in church my entire life. The burning in your chest, the connection to spirit that I had never had before. And I had it with those cards in my hand. Pretty much since then, I used them to help me find myself. The message again and again and again was share your story, tell your story. So I started my Instagram. At the time, it was called The Village Tarot Witch. And every day I took my card or cards that I had drawn and I put them on my chalkboard and I put little arrows and I put what the cards meant. And then in the caption, I wrote what each card meant and how I saw it applying to me that day. So it basically was like a tarot journal. I learned about sigil magic. I learned how to use bones for divination. I learned candle magic, all the things that are now a part of my practice. I learned from talking to people online and being taught by them. As all this went on, I was sharing my insights that I was receiving and how I felt like they applied to me and how I was learning from them. There was a lot that would happen in that house. It was like a train station for spirits. There was constant activity, but this energy did come back several times throughout the course when I lived there. And it would stand in the corner of my room and just kind of watch. It didn't really come close, but it had a very large presence. And I tend to think of it as more elemental. And that to me is based on the deep ancient magic. That's the best way that I can describe it. Like whatever that thing was probably existed before humanity existed. I do think that it was a wake-up call because it got me started on this path. I never would have picked up a deck of cards, literally ever. I never even thought about it until I was in that situation and I was presented with them. During this process where I'm finding myself, I had one reading, imagine sitting across the table from someone and they're, looking very seriously at you. Probably you're going to hand you a glass of whiskey and you know that you are not going to like the conversation that you're about to have. And they basically told me that my soul was shattered. There was missing pieces of me. Each one of those moments of trauma, I lost pieces of myself. And then I needed to go through the healing process. And my fucking ass thought that I could do this in one fell swoop. The message was so clear that I was like, oh, you know what? I'm a little bit fucked up. It was like, it was a moment where I was like, that seems obvious in hindsight. I was swimming through the wreckage, and some of that damage was done to me. And some of that, a lot of it, I did to myself because I didn't make myself a priority. I didn't know how to make myself a priority. I was living a life, even after I left Mormonism, I was living a life designed for a woman who has no other thoughts, no other interests outside of her husband and her children. And I wanted more. Like, I love my kids. I loved aspects of my life. I just knew it was a wake up call of being like, hey, you can't live like this anymore. You have to be a whole, complete person again. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I'm broken. And I say that, and that's something that I say a lot that people take issue with because they're like, you're not broken. I went through the damage. I can call myself broken. Like, it doesn't mean that I'm not healing. The Japanese art of filling in cracked pottery with gold. It's beautiful and it's reformed, but it was broken before. And that's what it felt like. So I was going through this journey where I was starting to explore what shadow work is. And I didn't even know that most people are afraid of shadow work because it sounds scary. It sounds dark. It sounds evil. It sounds like you are doing dark magic. And really, it's looking at your life and your fucking feelings, feeling them, and letting yourself heal and move on from them. So that took quite a while and I hated it. It's not fun to sit and feel the pain that I should have felt years ago, but I didn't know how to feel it then. I was trying to protect myself and survive in situations that I was out of my depth in a lot of those cases where I was doing the best that I could with the information that I had, but that also meant that I didn't have time to stop and really let it sink in how much these things had hurt me. I feel like you get these pushes to go along the path that you're supposed to be on. And I think that my pushes have been dramatic because I needed them to be dramatic because I wouldn't have noticed otherwise. I'm busy. I have 3 kids. My day-to-day, like it had to be big for me to slow down and notice. So I had been going through, I went through the process of like waking up. My corpse was reanimating. During that time, we had planned a trip to go to Salem, Massachusetts. And I still haven't been to Salem. To this day, I've never been to Salem. I was walking through my house and I saw a little spot of milk on the floor. Like, we're talking the size of a nickel. And I walked past it, I saw it, and I thought I should wipe that up. But I was doing 10 different things at once and I kind of forgot about it. And somehow I hit that spot of milk just right, fell, and felt something snap in my foot. I sat there and I had my hands wrapped around my foot, and my kids, I think I like gasped or something. And then I just kind of froze. And my kids came over and they were like, "Are you okay?" And they were trying to hug me. And I said, "Nobody touch me. Don't touch me." The ligaments in the top of my foot were torn in such a way that if it wasn't healing properly, I was going to need surgery. And after the fact, I found out that it was also fractured. So like in one fell swoop, I fucked it up good and proper. So I started binge watching ghost hunting shows. And by this time, I am firmly in the witchy world. I had that experience in my house and I had compartmentalized it so well that I still did not stop to think, are ghosts real? Like, I literally think that I was given a friendly shove to be like, hey, sit your ass down, pay attention, So I'm watching these ghost hunting shows and I was like, why is this explaining my life to me? I felt like this my entire life. The feeling like you're not alone in the room, feeling like somebody's watching you, the tingle you get on the back of your head. All of these things, other psychics, other ghost hunters are describing to me. And I was like, shut the fuck up. Have I been haunted this entire time? Like, it's that level. It feels like another person in your space. And I was explaining it to myself logically as you're anxious. So I'm watching it and I was like, what? What? How are they explaining me to me? Which is how I learned how to do mediumship. I understand how to talk to the cards and they understand how to talk to me, or whatever being is giving me this information. We're on the same radio frequency. So when I stepped into my mediumship, it's almost like developing my own language. And I'm not the only person who practices mediumship like this, but it is the most natural way for me to process it. I can occasionally get information from other ways, but if you want a good, accurate reading in a mediumship setting from me, my cards are the go-to, because that is the way, that's my touchstone. The cards and I are bonded in a way that is how I understand what spirit is saying to me, whether that is a personal message for me and my life, or whether that is communicating with a person who has passed on. I am interested in telling the stories of the spirits who are often overlooked, who don't get to be seen. I think that whatever frequency I radiate, they recognize that about me, because they started to come to me, and it would scare me at first because I would be asleep at night and I'd wake up thinking that someone was standing by my bed. And every time I would get so scared and I'd cleanse the whole house and I would, I just leave me alone, until I started asking, who are you? And what did you want? And a lot of the time, these spirits who were actively coming to me just wanted someone to know that they were still there. They wanted someone to know what happened to them. And that is my passion. That is what motivates me. That's what drives me, is telling these stories of the spirits who are overlooked or unheard. And if we look back at my life, I was overlooked and unheard for the majority of it. I would speak and nobody would hear me. I would try to explain how I felt and I was brushed off or told that I was over dramatic or whatever, And so I think that the work that I do with the living and the dead, it is guiding people towards healing. It's guiding people towards peace, because I know what it feels like to be in those moments. I know what emotional damage feels like. I know I speak that language. If we want to keep using the language metaphor, that makes sense to me. My calling is in the dark, shadowy places that most people don't want to go. I hold space for people's pain and I listen and I empathize. I hold your hand through the process if you are alive sitting next to me, or if you are on the other side of the veil, and I help you move towards the light. So I was developing all of this and feeling very confident. I felt like I found my purpose. I felt like I found my path. And I was actively thinking about the next steps that my life would take, which is when things went bad. Things were not happy at home for a long time. And my ex-husband decided that what would be best for our family is to take a job back in Texas and move back. And I had feelings about it, but my core conditioning was still, you do what you're told. So there was about 3 weeks turnaround where I was supposed to have the house packed up and moved. Like, I was told the start date was in 3 weeks time. And I was like, what the, this is not workable. So he left and went to Texas. There was a few other things happening. And the kids and I stayed behind. And things got much worse from that point on. And my life stopped being a healing journey. It stopped feeling like a healing journey. And it felt like being caught in the middle of a hailstorm with thunder and lightning and heavy pelting rain and chunks of ice being hurled at you from all sides. So I stopped feeling like I knew where I was going and started feeling like I was bracing for the next bad thing constantly, which is it's no way to live. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and that was the survival mode that I was in. So everything started to get warped and everything was scary. Nothing seemed safe anymore, even the things that I had counted on. So my personal life was falling apart. This was about a full year of disasters. And we're talking big issues, the kind of issues that nobody wants to face. And I started noticing physical symptoms. I knew what a panic attack was, but I had never experienced one. So I was in my living room, scared out of my mind. My heart was racing and my chest started to hurt so bad that I started to wonder if I was having a heart attack, which is often a lot of time people who get panic attacks will think that they are having a heart attack. And I knew enough about panic attacks and I knew what the state of my life was like to be like, this is not a heart attack. You're having a panic attack. I'm trying to figure out how to hold everything together to keep my kids' lives as normal as possible. But I was bearing the weight of all of that alone. I didn't really have anybody who could help me. Like I had friends who knew what I was going through. I was telling them, but that kind of burden isn't really one that can be shared. It's one that you kind of have to go through alone. I was everything for everyone, but I was coming apart at the seams. And I didn't know at that time that I had PTSD. I knew that the stress was getting to me and that I was sick. I didn't function like I used to. And that realization was awful because I worked so hard. I put in so much work to become the person that I was. When a person experiences a traumatic event, the old version of them dies. And each one of those moments in my life was a form of death. When I wasn't able to go to art school, that was a death on its own. When I decided to change everything about myself to fit in with my religion, that was a death. When I left my religion, that was a death. I was in this moment where I knew that I needed help and I knew that I needed people to help support me so that I could regain my physical and mental health. So when this was happening, I made the decision to move back to my parents' house. And I had a lot of factors that came into it, but it also was another instance where I broke my own heart because I loved my life in Florida. My husband and I, by that point, there was no saving this. There was no saving that relationship. And I knew that moving in with my parents meant that it was time to take the next concrete steps of this is what I need to do so that we can both move on with our lives. And breakups are scary. Divorces are scary. You are letting go of a life that you had. But since I had spent so much time during the past year trying to avoid disaster, my warrior brain took every move I was making as a threat. So anytime I would reach out to the lawyers or make a move, my entire body would shut down and I would go into this freeze mode essentially where I couldn't make my way out of it. I had to take a step back from helping other people so that I could help myself. The person that I was, I did all that shadow work. I rediscovered who I was as a person. She didn't exist anymore. And I was left in this like wasteland of like a wreckage of a human. And I was like, I'm sharing these spiritual insights and all of it is true and honest because the messages that I share are genuinely, I write them the day that I share them. So it is actually what's happening in my life at the time. And I was open about it, about that I was struggling, that I was having bad mental health days and what I was trying to do to course correct. But I had to relearn how to live again, but in a much different way. So I kept looking at myself and being like, I could be so much farther than where I am if I wasn't so messed up. And it really, really, really took a long time for me to show myself the compassion that I deserved. I had to learn to love this version of myself because I didn't want to feel like this, and I wanted so badly to go back to the person that I was before I had PTSD. I didn't want to be this shell of human. I wanted my vitality back. I wanted my glow back. I wanted all of the things that made me so excited. I'm not where I thought I would be, but also I think I'm where I belong. I'd prefer to not have PTSD, if I'm being perfectly honest. Like, could I have learned these lessons in a less dramatic way? Maybe, but also the level of compassion that it's given me in terms of spiritual work. I kind of think that this was a gift. For a long time, like it was a curse, or like this is something that had been done to me and I hated it and I didn't want any part of it. But now I'm realizing I may not understand every person's experience directly because I haven't walked in your shoes. I haven't lived your experiences, but I can empathize to a heavy degree because I've been there. Healing isn't linear. Healing is a journey, and we are never done. It doesn't stop. It's not something like I'm like, okay, well, this is over. These are my mindfulness practices. I will have to stay on top of that for probably the rest of my life. I am not someone who can afford to not take the time to check in with myself, to check in with my feelings, to check in with my emotions. And the toolkit that I've developed is largely a spiritual one. I wanted somebody else to fix me. I wanted somebody else to make it stop. I wanted somebody to swoop in like a knight in shining armor. And the truth of the matter is, a fucking knight is not going to come. I had to pick up the goddamn sword and do it myself. That's the there's no knight coming. You are the hero of your own story. And when you are in the battle trenches, that sucks ass. Like, there's no other way to word that. The last thing that I wanted was to be handed a metaphorical sword by my spirit team and being like, go get him, tiger. And there were times that I threw an absolute fucking fit. And I was like, well, fuck you. I don't want to talk to you. No, this is ridiculous. Don't give me a sword. Give me some help. Give me a hand up out of the mud that I'm sitting in. And I had a lot of anger directed at myself, directed at my spiritual team, all sorts of misplaced. And now I know that was PTSD Karly. That was warrior me being like, I'm doing this because I have to, but I don't want to be here. I don't want to experience this. I had the tools, I had the knowledge to know that I could heal and I could recover from this life-changing, devastating series of events that I went through, and I could come back stronger than I was before. If you loved what you heard today, please consider leaving us a review. Death Becomes Us is an Emotional Pictures production produced by Sarah Nichols and Alex Eisenstein. Music by Oleski Chistilin.